Greetings and welcome to another value-sized, overly ambitious episode of Genre Grinder. My name is Gabe and I have COVID-19. Joining me yet again is Patrick Ripoll. Say hello, Patrick.
Hi, how's it going?
What is it like not to have COVID-19? I don't remember.
Oh, it's great. My muscles are not fatigued. My lungs are full of capacity. My brain is, when they're talking about the weather, they say visibility unlimited. That's my brain right now. No fog whatsoever. It's
not an ounce.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, we were holding this episode back far enough that I decided we're just going to go for it, see what happens. Mm-hmm. Today, we're going to talk about one of the 3 or 4 genres that I actually consider myself a borderline expert on, which is Giallo, which is the plural is Gialli. I'm aiming to record something even greater with an even greater expert than myself someday, but that fell through for the time. So I opted for Patrick, who doesn't even like Giallo movies, which I thought was a great idea.
I will say, pleasantly surprised we're covering 12 movies on this podcast. Turns out I like 7. So,
oh, it's great. That's honestly, that's a better record than most human beings, I feel. But the idea here is to have something to match the episodes Patrick and I did covering the greatest year in slasher movie history, which we both decided was 1981, and the greatest year in international horror history, which I decided was 1960. So we're going to cover what I think is the greatest year in Giallo history, 1971. It's not the greatest that all the greatest movies came out this year, but there was just so many of them. It was like the peak of the genre. I compiled a list of 42 total movies. And of those, we're going to cover 12. And of those 12, as Patrick said, 7 are good. I like more than 7, but I just picked 12 that I thought were important in one way or another. I looked at the list later, and I've only seen 20 of these movies. I hadn't even heard of a couple of them, and there's no way to see a couple of them. So it would have been a lot to try to cover 40. We learned that on the slasher movie one, I think, to not try to cover every single one.
The proto-slasher one was a real ordeal as well.
Yeah, which is funny because we're about to have some overlap with that sucker.
Oh, that's right.
Later on here. So real quick, the best, I'm going to give the Cliff's Note version of what a Giallo is. And as happens with every niche genre, it's pretty much impossible to define in any way that makes everybody happy. They begin, the term Giallo is from books, and these sensationalistic books that had yellow covers. Giallo just means yellow in Italian. And they were some from big names like Agatha Christie and Raymond Chandler and Edgar Wallace and Poe. Others were real trash, pulpy mystery fiction. And we have equivalent to that here, but we didn't all publishers didn't just choose one color to go with for all these books. So that's why that stuck for thrillers in Italy, and still sort of sticks to this day, though I feel like the term sort of just means any horror or exploitation movie from Italy at any point in time just gets put under this title. As far as influences go beyond the books, Hitchcock is the main one, and there was a Giallo predecessor genre in West Germany that were murder mysteries known as Krimi films. I believe it's pronounced Krimi and not creamy, as in criminal. A lot were based on Edgar Wallace novels, and even when they weren't based on Edgar Wallace novels, they pretended they were based on Edgar Wallace novels. Then the Krimi started around the 60s, and they were popular in Italy and West Germany, and they ended up overlapping a lot with Giallo as it began. I mean, we can't really find the first movie. There's people that argue that the Luciano Visconti neo-realist version of Postman Always Wings Twice from 1943 counts as the first Giallo. But I think most fans point to Mario Bava's The Girl Who Knew Too Much. That one's also known as The Evil Eye, the Roger Corman re-release, which is re-edited. That is a movie defined by cliches that were linked to Hitchcock, as in the name, Hollywood noir. It was in black and white, German expressionism. And then the year after that, in 1964, Baffa made a second full-color one called Blood and Black Lace that had big bloody set pieces, more violence, and had this thing where the killer wears black gloves and like a raincoat and rain hat. And in this case, he's also wearing they're also wearing a mask, but the that part didn't catch on, but the black gloves really caught on. And these fads, they burned out fast. But even spaghetti westerns and peplum movies, they usually took a couple years to peak. So it's interesting to revisit 1971 as a craze, as Gialli as a craze, because they were all desperate. Even though there had been Giallo movies in the late 60s, all these movies we're about to talk about are almost exclusively desperately trying to recreate what Dario Argento did when he released The Bird with Crystal Plumage in 1970. That movie was a massive hit in Europe and America, and I believe parts of Asia too. So it became, even more than Bava, it sort of became a standard. And then it peaked like we said in 1971, and it tapered off to be replaced with fantastical horror movies, cops and robbers movies, which we call Polizio Tesci or Tesho, and adventure movies. And a lot of those had cannibals. So Gialli has a lot of subsets and different kinds. It's really hard. I used to be of the mind that Giallo were only Italian murder mysteries, but they don't really need to be a murder mystery, and they don't even really need to be Italian. There's plenty of Spanish ones in particular that had Italian co-producers and co-filmmakers, and the actors are from all over Europe and every once in a while America as well. So I tried to, at the beginning of each of these movies we're going to cover, I tried to create a sort of subgenre to try to set up what we're talking about. Like I said, 12 movies in total. We're going to do them in release order according to their Italian or Spanish premiere dates. There's one Spanish movie we're covering, and a lot of these didn't make it to America for several years. But that's not the problem here. We don't care about what Americans thought, because this was an Italian genre that blew up and then disappeared. And also, since I'm going to be having to pronounce a lot of Italian words and names, and we all know how bad I am at that, I'm actually going to use an Italian speech bot to throw in all the Italian names of the movies we're going to cover here. And I'm going to mostly ignore, unless I think there's major confusion, trying to pronounce the Italian names of movies that we're not specifically talking about. I'm just going to refer to it by their American names. Is there anything you need to add to the preamble there, Patrick?
Something I found interesting, and for people who are more familiar with the history of American horror than the history of Italian horror, I asked you in preparing for this, should I see Bird with the Crystal Plumage? And you said, since it was so inspirational, that I should. And I asked if you considered it basically the equivalent of the way Friday the 13th in 1980 sort of was a massive cultural phenomenon that in 1981 spawned all of these imitators. It appears that Bird with the Crystal Plumage in 1970, exactly 10 years earlier,
right,
did the same thing with these Gialli of 1971. And I find that, especially since so many of these are considered like sort of predecessors to the slasher genre, I found that a helpful way to wrap my head around the cultural phenomenon of Gialli, especially of this year.
Yeah, there's always, like I said, there were previous movies that we actually love, fans love, the earlier Bava movies, and there's a series of Umberto Lenzi movies, which I'll talk about when we get to his to talking about him, that actually also predated that, but everybody just changed course. So it's like, yeah, there were movies inspired by Black Christmas and Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it was really Friday the 13th that sort of set that standard and made everything blow up, and the one that people were most likely to try to mimic at the time.
Right.
Problem with these being in release order is we're going to end on one Patrick hates, but
that's all right.
We're going to start on one that Patrick actually likes. The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, released in January 15th in Italy. This is directed by Sergio Martino. The Italian title is
Lo strano vizio della signora Ward.
It is AKA The Blade of the Ripper, Next, and The Next Victim. Blade of the Ripper was what it was on a lot of video boxes here in America.
Next with an exclamation point seems like such a flippant title for such a strange and psychologically driven Giallo film. Yeah, it's not like a movie that has 12 murders in it.
No, and that was the Americans titling. They just tried to make everything sound like a complete body dump of a movie.
Yeah.
When a socialite and heiress, Julia Ward, begins receiving blackmail letters attributed to a mysterious serial killer, she suspects her cruel and sadistic former lover, Jean is behind them. With her husband, Neil, frequently out of town, she falls into the arms of her friend's cousin, George. As the unknown assassin begins to make his move, she fears that one of the three men in her life may be the killer. I'm going to call this a psychedelic psychodrama type. There's a lot of these psychodrama giallo that don't even really sometimes have a murder, or if they do, it will be just one murder, or it'll be the threat of murder. This one is a little bit more of a body count than that. And I should say Martino is arguably the third or fourth most important filmmaker behind Bava, Argento, and he's kind of tied with Umberto Lenzi. He made successful Poliziotteschi and horror movies, and he made a late-stage Western called Menage, known as The Man Called Blade here in America. But in terms of sheer quantity of his giallo output, he was second only to Argento and tied with Lenzi, depending on what you consider a giallo and what you don't. And he also executive produced Lenzi's So Sweet, So Perverse. So he's a name, and he has a distinct style, which is something a lot of these guys don't have because they were just working for the money. And so what I'm going to do at the beginning of each of these is if this is a filmmaker that made a lot of movies, I'm going to quickly list what movies are fitting into their giallo canon. And in this case, we were actually starting with the first, Strange Vice of Miss Ward. He also did The Case of the Scorpion's Tail the same year, which we could have covered, but it's not as interesting or good as this one. All the Colors of the Dark, which I think a lot of people think is his best movie. I know you agree with that, Patrick.
Yeah, number one with a bullet.
And it's probably the most, I would say, Martino-esque. Your Vice is a Locked Room, and Only I Have a Key, which is a sleazy one that is pretty much beloved because of its long-ass title. Torso, which is my favorite, but is not necessarily the most Lenzi-esque of them. We actually covered that we talked about that briefly in the very first episode of Genre Writer about proto-slashers, because it is sort of a slasher movie during its last half. Then he did Suspicious Death of a Minor, which is sort of him switching gears to the Poliziotteschi kind of thing, so it's sort of a murder mystery and a cop movie. Then he did many years later in 1982 The Scorpion with Two Tails, which was meant to be a TV series that failed and turned into standalone movie. And then another TV thing called Mozart is a Murderer in 1990, which I know nothing about. This is the beginning of it all for him, and then he kind of tapers off. I think it's a good movie. I think that All the Colors of the Dark is the better movie. And I think that if this was a Directors Club podcast episode, we glaze over Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward just a little bit on our way to get to All the Colors of the Dark.
Right.
And so this is a case of this formula kind of becoming a problem because we're covering a lesser movie, but we're still, you have the beginnings of the stuff that Martino would do in later movies.
Right. The movies that he made with Edwidge Fenech, I don't like when people sort of arbitrarily lump unconnected films in a filmmaker's filmography as trilogies, but like that really is just like three of the same variations of a theme.
Yeah.
And this being the opening salvo, it's useful to see where it starts and then where it ends up.
Yeah. And you do get what I think is Martino's giallo ethos, which is men are violent, predatory bastards. And even the ones you are attracted to as a woman, because he has very many feminine protagonists, sometimes they're men. Even if you're attracted to them or have been in a long relationship with them, you can't trust them, and they might be a murderer.
But it's kind of hot.
Yes,
it's the other part. It's like it's kind of sexy that they're dangerous and that they might kill you any moment.
Right. There's an S&M kind of under cut, and the fact that Fenech is a huge sex symbol in her own right. That she did a lot of giallo, but she was really known for her sexy comedies.
I've not seen any of these comedies. I have to say, all of these Sergio Martino Gialli with Edwidge Fenech, It's like Ansel Adams and like America's National Monuments, where he's like he constantly finds inventive ways to film all of her peaks and valleys, and like her body is just, and it's like it's a little gross to like harp on the sexiness, but it is, these are like very sleazy movies, and that is very much part of like what they're going for with these movies. And it is really just like, wow, she has like an incredibly curvaceous body, and he is going to get every angle and every shape and lighting that he could do. There's just constant innovative ways of getting Edwidge Fenech naked in these movies.
And it's an interesting duality because he, unlike some particularly bad Giallo filmmakers, I don't think that he's necessarily misogynist.
No,
he relates to her character or whichever female character is the lead. So there's this duality of it being really exploitative, but also on the character's side. Unlike slasher movies where there'll be exploitative nudity and sex, and then that character will be killed.
Right. It's like the sexuality is not, she's not necessarily punished for having sexuality. She's punished because she's attracted to a certain kind of man.
Right.
And there's an inevitable fallout that comes with that.
Yeah. And then when I was talking about the psycho drama type, later movies of his are about driving women mad, whereas this one is less about portraying madness and more about portraying vulnerability, making sure we understand that she is being attacked from all sides, which is scary. I think Torso's his scariest movie because it has one of the fucking greatest shock shots in any movie ever. But I think this one, because he's not quite getting into his psychedelic craziness, is also a pretty intense movie, especially when you watch all the other ones after it and you realize how few of them are actually frightening.
Right. There's real heavy vibes to All the Colors of the Dark, but there's not necessarily a chase scene like the parking garage scene in Strange Vice, which I think is like it's like an excellently staged bit of suspense.
Yeah. And then I should say, I don't know anything about Freud, but this movie begins with a Freud quote. And it's funny, I just rewatched In the Folds of the Flesh from 1969, which also begins with a Freud quote. And I'm pretty sure those aren't the only two Gialli that begin with a Freud quote. And I assume this is related to Psycho and the fact that Psycho ends with Doctor explaining all of the mental illness that led the killer to violence, which is something that happens at the end of Bird with the Crystal Plumage as well. But it's better fitting here because it is kind of a movie about sadomasochistic urges. And I think Freud is the right person to invoke in that, but I honestly don't know. Maybe that's a Jungian thing. I would have to have a...
I saw that David Cronenberg movie. It's both of them.
It's both of them. Okay. That's true. I saw that too. They both are into it. So the other thing that Martino is trying to get here is what the West German producers apparently called jet set Giallo, which was something they basically, after Bird with the Crystal Plumage came out, they told Dario Argento, we want more of these jet set Giallos. And it was sort of an all-encompassing thing that I don't think anybody ever defined, but I think it meant like they involve a lot of people in other countries. So the protagonist is quite often a foreigner in Italy or an Italian in Germany or something like that. And they are very fashion conscious. And so between your Argento-like murder scenes, and I think that this is a case of, with the exception of the weird slow motion nightmares, I think this is the closest we ever see Martino get to just saying, yeah, I'll just do that scene I saw in Bird with the Crystal Plumage. You also have these breezy street scenes of people jet setting around Vienna in a fancy car and wearing nice clothes and checking out all the landmarks in town. And then the other thing that kind of feeds into the fashion part is that the protagonist has this retrofuturist apartment they stay in that is like a perfect mix of ugly and cool. And the decor actually matches in this case. So I'm guessing they either had a budget or it came decorated, because usually you'll have something like this in a cheaper movie and they'll just have dug around the back lot and found everything they think looks chic and shoved it in a room, a big open soundstage that is clearly not someone's apartment or house, and there's just clutter everywhere. So this is a case of them kind of doing that nicely and thinking it through. Actually, none of these movies we're going to talk about are particularly bad about it, but you see a lot of it in the later 70s movies where it's just crap all over the house.
Yeah, I honestly, like, a lot of the times when I end up watching a Giallo, I get the same feeling I have when I'm like watching Brazil, where it's just like the frame is so crowded and claustrophobic that I just have anxiety as people are sitting on couches talking.
Yeah. You're not sure if it's a couch or a glass sculpture.
I just know that there's like a bust of a philosopher behind them, and I'm like, this woman is 25. What is happening?
Yeah.
I do think it's worth noting the specific sort of technique that Martino uses in this film to sort of create this contemplative sort of interior feeling. Like, part of it is obviously like the dream sequences and the flashbacks and the slow motion that's all happening in her head, but the other part is he uses a lot of negative space. There's just like a lot of isolating her in these like black frames. There's like, when she first starts getting flowers, there's just a shot of her through the peephole and she's just surrounded by black, and there's just all throughout he's using a lot of negative space, not just to isolate people, but to like sort of create a void around them that sort of brings to mind the sort of interior of the mind in a way I thought was cool.
So yeah, I think this is a slick film. I think if there had been Martino's only film as director, he would still be pretty beloved. I'm not sure if I would consider it a good murder mystery, but it's sort of happening in the background while we're focusing on her, which I think that's a nice way of avoiding one of the Argento cliches that then pops up in a lot of these movies with your amateur detectives.
Something I really appreciate about the Martino Gialli with Edwidge Fenech is that if there is some sort of mystery, it is sort of in the background while a emotional story is happening in the foreground, and that makes it so, like, the fact that there is this sort of straight razor slasher that's happening that is sort of this red herring, and in fact what you have is a plot element ripped from Strangers on a Train, where two men have decided to knock off their respective sort of troublesome women.
Right.
Like, that doesn't matter. Like, you're not spending tons of time where they're laying out all these different suspects and you have to deal with all this like investigation and you have to struggle trying to remember who's who, because the central story is about Mrs. Ward and what she is going through emotionally. And that's the stuff that when the Gialli foreground the plot, as we will talk about later, that's when I start to, as the Gialli hater of this podcast, that's when I start to check out and just resent that I have to watch it.
And and there's a lot of good slashers like that too, where the slasher is good because the characters are interesting and the slashing is going on around them, and then they have to deal with it by the end of the film. It's kind of a nice way to do it. I plan on ending all these describing what actors or actresses are important in the Giallo canon, and I don't know, maybe I'll move this to the front later, but in this case it's Fenech again, who broke into she's mostly known, as I said, for her commedia sexy all'italiana, but she broke into Gialli and Mario Bava's film The Five Dolls for an August Moon, which is one of the lesser seen of Bava's Gialli from the period. And then she stars in Andrea Bianchi's Strip Nude for Your Killer, which is a particularly sleazy one. Giuliano Carnemio's The Case of the Bloody Iris, and Ruggero Deodato's Phantom of Death, which came out in '88, way late in the sort of Giallo canon, and is sort of a slasher movie and a murder mystery. Hard to describe that one. And then she has a really nice cameo in Eli Roth's Hostel 2, where she plays a art teacher, and the joke there is that the main characters are all women, and they are out in public drawing from a nude male model. So she is teaching young women to appreciate the nude male form, this actress whose majority of her career is based on memories of her being naked and curvy.
For more on that, check out our commentary track on Hostel Part 2 on Tracks of the Damned, my podcast.
Yes. And then fun fact is that she was married to Sergio Martino's brother, Luciano Martino, who was a producer on most of these movies. So I'm sure that Sergio liked working with her, but he also might not have had a choice. He had to work with his sister-in-law. And the male leads are also Martino regulars, George Hilton, who was a big Western star, and he smoothly transitioned into Gialli. He starred in one of the earliest ones, Romolo Guerre's The Sweet Body of Deborah from 1968. That's a particularly important one that gets overlooked a lot. And then Ivan Rasmussen, who is a very good bastard. He just plays awesome bastards. I cannot think of a single movie where he plays a good guy, except for Umberto Lenzi's The Man from Deep River, which was the movie that was a ripoff of A Man Called Horse, but led to the Italian cannibal fad. And then, the soundtrack was composed by Nora Orlandi, who is still alive as of the release of this podcast. And the main theme from this movie is used in Kill Bill Volume 2. So people might recognize it if they ever watch it. Yes, Christine? Oh, two little factoids that I'm sure on the IMDb page is that it's spelled Mrs. Ward, Wardh, because apparently there was a real Mrs. Ward without the H who they just wanted to avoid legal trouble with her, so they add the H. And that there is a scene where the killer writes a note saying, your vice is a locked room and only I have the key, which was then used as the title of a couple movies later. Now we will move on to The Cat O' Nine Tails, which was released February 12th. This is Argento's second movie. The Italian title is
Il gatto a nove code.
In Thailand, it was called Operation Murder. And in Japan, it was called I Am an Eyewitness, which is ironic because the guy is blind. I'm going to consider this an amateur detective / Crystal Plumage type because Argento is really reusing his own formula here. The storyline is a reporter and a blind retired journalist try to solve a series of murders. The crimes are connected to experiments by a pharmaceutical company in secret research. The two end up becoming targets of the killer. I'm getting all these from Letterboxd, by the way. So I think that a lot of people listening to this are aware of Argento's filmography, and I'm going to actually skip this one for time's sake. But so this is number 2 of the 3 in the Animal trilogy, including another one that was released at the end of the year, which we're not going to talk about, Four Flies on Great Velvet. And then he tried to take a break, and it failed miserably. And so he made Deep Red after that, which is another really good one. For many years, this was considered the Argento sophomore slump, which is, to me, as a fan, is incredible in retrospect, not only because he really fell off in the 90s and made some genuinely bafflingly awful movies. I also kind of learned to like it. And I think, and I have this note here, but you're going to disagree with it now that I know what you think of it. I think it was one that could have been released in American theaters at the time without people really noticing this was an Italian movie. Because it has 2 American stars and just sort of feels like a generic thriller that takes place in Italy.
I think I don't know enough about the American market of the era. Like I don't know what about Crystal Plumage connected with people. I too would have thought the Crystal Plumage would seem very exotic.
Yeah, I think it's more exotic personally.
That might actually be why I would disagree. And now that I think about it, is despite the fact that Carl Malden, and we all love his nose, Carl Malden is in this movie. I think that this movie doesn't have the exciting allure of Crystal Plumage. It doesn't have that over the top set piece like that glass box that kicks off the plot. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have the sort of allure of that like strange painting and figuring out what's going on with the painting. There's a lot of over the top ideas in Crystal Plumage that are very exciting, and Cat o' Nine Tails feels sort of frustratingly ordinary, but incompetent. Importantly,
okay. I mean, and there's reasoning behind this, and I think one thing I don't have in my notes here, but that I think Crystal Plumage was written by someone who wasn't sure he was ever going to get to make another movie. So I think it's really full of ideas. And Cat o' Nine Tails is made by someone who realizes he has to make a second hit in less than a year. and so it's completely empty of major ideas. There's one idea at its center, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, that is kind of funny because it's a bad idea. But Argento himself hates this movie. And according to an interview with Alan Jones and Profondo Argento, the man, the myths, the magic from Fab Press, he spent most of his time railing against his own instincts and fearing that he was giving into producer and distributor demands, and ended up accidentally making an overly Americanized thriller. And the thing that a lot of people point to is the fact that there is a car chase and a happy ending. There are plenty of car chases in Italian movies. I don't know why that was something that was harped upon. And I'm not sure. I think the ending is happy. I think it's really pretty ambiguous. But if we're approaching it as a Dario Argento movie from this period in his career where he's the most exciting new filmmaker in Italy, it is a disappointingly normal movie that I just think is, and I'm going to say this a lot, and I hate that I'm going to say this a lot, but I think it's a nice vibe. It's a movie that I just sort of put on and look at.
Sure. I mean, that's the Giallo story. The Giallo story is not, wow, how did they come up with such a well-plotted tale? The Giallo story is like, I just like hanging out and looking at these people's clothes.
Yeah. And I think it's a handsome movie, and it's not a wild movie. Like, I think that there's something, Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward is a wild movie. It's like, oh shit, this is made by unhinged people. This is a movie made by a guy who's just like, I guess let's just go for it. And so I make notes of the only moments that really feel intrinsically Argento-esque are the train station murder, which begins with the killer's point of view, which was a big Argento thing. He did best actually in Deep Red, I think. And he shoves a guy on the track, and the guy's face slams against the train's grill in extreme close-up, but it's faked slow motion. It's like standard motion that's been slowed down just a little bit instead of actually throwing an actor into the grill of a train. And then there's a sort of shocking, ironically macabre, kind of funny bit where then he gets rolled like a dervish within the train's wheels, and he spins and he gets blood on everybody. And it's completely ignored because paparazzi photographers are there to take pictures of a starlet who's coming out of the train. So everybody immediately ignores the bloody, gory, dead man and starts focusing on the starlet, which is the kind of ironic humor that Argento was still kind of good at the time before he kind of went away from that.
The Argento sense of humor is one of the things I cannot stand, and I can never stand in any of his movies. I kind of like the dopey vibe of Deep Red, and I have learned to accept and even love some of the dumb humor in that. But like, this movie is just full of stuff that makes me roll my eyes. Like when the killer is sneaking into the science facility to steal the information or whatever. There's two scientists who walked by who's like, and this woman, she took off her shirt and she had nothing on underneath, so I bought 3 shirts. And it was just like, what is that's not a story, that's nothing. And then later there's like a whole thing, there's a whole little series about Bing Bang when they're talking about like testing couples' genetic material to see if their children will have any sort of birth defects or anything, and they just keep saying Bing Bang over again. And the starlet thing is like, I kind of like that as a joke, is that all of the paparazzi rush to take pictures of the dead man and then go, okay, we got that. And then they rush back over to the starlet, which they're there to take pictures of in the first place. But then it immediately cuts to one of the paparazzo going like, a man is dead and we're taking pictures of a starlet.
Yeah,
and I'm like, oh God.
He says, yeah, keep laughing. A man is dead, which is, it definitely feels like the morality, because Argento movies do have this weird morality to them.
It's just so clumsy.
That.
All of it, or like, even I like Bird with Crystal Plumage quite a bit more than this, but like all the so long stuff in that movie, I think it's just lame.
And I don't know, maybe that's a dubbing issue. Maybe it would be better. But the problem is these movies is that they were shot without sound, so everything's dubbed anyway. So who knows if it plays better in Italian? I know that the 2 lead performances probably don't, because they're American actors,
right?
But I do like that scene, and it's very sad because there's a much shorter version of this that was, for some reason, either public domain or illegally made as budget VHS and DVDs over the years. That's a much shorter American cut, and it cuts the entire thing out. You just see the guy fly onto the railroad track, and then you just see everybody ignoring him, and the joke, and it just destroys everything about the scene that makes it crazy. So when I finally saw an uncut version years later, it was like it's not even that gory. It's sort of weird, but it was just such a thrilling bit of weirdness that it just made the movie that much better for me.
Yeah, I will say, despite the fact that this is not like over the top and like, I don't think Crystal Plumage is particularly dreamy, especially when you compare it to later Argento, but like it does have more of a heightened reality to it.
Mm-hmm.
I do appreciate that Argento fully commits to just like really nasty violence when the violence does occur, where
Right.
like even though most of the people die by getting strangled, like the one woman, when she's strangled, there's just like a close-up of her mouth foaming saliva on the floor. That's so upsetting and gross, and it's just like that's the extra Argento touch. Or
and
it's not enough for the villain to fall down an open elevator shaft. He has to like grab onto the wire cable as he falls down, like scoring his hands. That's like that extra little that I appreciate.
It's the pain factor too.
Yeah.
And that, again, going back to Deep Red has the best pain factor.
Deep Red's incredible, yeah.
Bashing teeth into things, scalding people with hot water, like not just people getting stabbed, because most of us haven't been stabbed. We don't know what that feels like, but
we don't know what it feels like to get dragged by a car and pinball down the road.
Yeah, and survive and only get your head finally crushed. I do want to quickly talk about the cast again, because it wasn't abnormal for Argento to have a couple of decent sized foreign stars, but this is probably the biggest names he ever got, which was Karl Malden, who was still an A-lister, and B-lister on his way to the A-list, James Franciscus. Franciscus was in Planet of the Apes, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the second Planet of the Apes movies. He was basically hired as a clone of Charlton Heston, who didn't really want to make the movie, so they needed a different protagonist to show up who basically looks like Charlton Heston, and then Heston himself shows up at the very end. But I think the two of them have some chemistry. I like the scene where they're walking through the graveyard and kind of talking to each other, and I think that brings a lot to the movie. I think that's when, I don't know if Argento was just, he might have, he was known for hating on act. He really didn't like Tony Musante, who is the American actor in Bird of the Crystal Plumage. So I don't know if he was totally hands off and these guys just were able to direct themselves. But I should say, people who don't know who Karl Malden is, like he was in Streetcar Named Desire. He won an Oscar for that, and he was nominated for On the Waterfront. And just before Cat of Nine Tails, he redefined his career as Detective Mike Stone on Streets of San Francisco, which is a really popular TV show. That character became such a icon that he essentially played the same character in a series of American Express commercials, which is the "Don't Leave Home Without It" thing that, you know, if we're going to talk about slasher movies, eventually made itself into Friday the 13th 6, I think, is the one that has the American Express card joke.
All culture eventually trickles back down into slashers.
And specifically Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th movies.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of them.
Yeah, and then Franciscus stayed in Italy for a lot of movies. He was in the Enzo G. Castellari's Jaws ripoff, The Last Shark. And he had, interestingly, he had a made-for-TV show the same year Cat of Nine Tails came out, called Long Street, where he played a blind insurance investor who investigated murder and stuff. So he kind of played a version of the character that Malden is playing in this movie. That show wasn't very popular and got canceled. And apparently the Seeing Eye Dog was like a major character, not just a dog. So I don't really know much about it, but I do think that's really interesting. In the same year, he played basically the same character. And then Cinzia de Carolis, I'm going to say that again. Cinzia de Carolis. Cinzia de Carolis. Cinzia de Carolis. She's a child actor in this. She plays the niece. She appeared in Ricardo Freitas' Night of the Devils, which is the same story as the Wouterlach from Black Sabbath, but feature length. And she is wildly miscast as John Saxon's Lolita neighbor in Cannibal Apocalypse, which is sort of this really inappropriate part of this otherwise harmless movie. But she's currently a big-time vocal performer for Italian dubs of cartoons and anime in particular, which I thought is cool. And then the plot point that is the one thing that Argento seemed to bring to the table here is the idea that people with an extra Y syndrome,
chromosome. I meant the word chromosome here,
are antisocial and would, you would, if you could figure out who had the extra Y syndrome,
Jesus Christ, chromosome,
you could pre-crime all the criminals.
Pre-what?
Pre-crime. Like you could lock them up because of their... It was an actual theory. It was debunked by 69, which is a couple years before this movie came out. But he went with it, and according to Luigi Cosi, who co-wrote part of it, Argento, Dardano Sacchesi, and Luigi Culo borrowed the plot point from Roy and John Bolting's British thriller The Twisted Nerve. But they seem to have misunderstood it because The Twisted Nerve is actually about a killer with extra chromosome that means he's Down syndrome, which is really bad. But they turned it into something else, and it doesn't work. And then his next movie, which again I'm not really going to talk about, but that one has this debunked science about how the last thing you see before you die is imprinted on your eye, and they can find the killer by looking at your iris. Which is another disproven idea. And it's funny to me because Bird with the Crystal Plumage, I think, has this underlying thing about they use all this science to try to figure out who the killer is. And it's not really harped upon, but every assumption they come to is wrong in that movie. So it's interesting to me that in the next two movies, he tried to make junk science a reliable part of the narrative. I think that's weird. But people who defend the movie say that the reason the killer isn't because he's XYY, but because he's afraid people will find out he's XYY. Maitland McDonough kind of talks about that in her book, Broken Mirrors, Broken Minds. And I'm not sure I buy it, but it is a pretty interesting way of looking at it to kind of defend the weirdness of it all.
It's kind of a moot point because if they're supposed to be on the forefront of scientific research and this man is so paranoid about this thing that was debunked 2 years earlier, then it's dumb either way. Yeah.
And it's just strange. And it's very weird. It's a very weird thing that dates the movie in a bad way too. Like Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward is super dated, but in a really good way. Whereas this one's just sort of like, yeah, we don't get science. And it's not really a science fiction movie, so you can't even kind of extend it that. Anyway, I don't have anything else to say on this one. I like it. I do like the poison milk scene. I think that's pretty suspenseful.
I think you have to be able to accept that someone would have sex and then immediately drink pouches of milk.
I do, because I've never been to Italy, so I assume that that's what you do in Italy is you have sex and then the milkman brings you your triangle of milk and you drink it immediately because you don't want it to go bad.
I just have a note in my notes that is all caps. It says pouches of post-sex milk, and then under it, poisoned pouches of post-sex milk.
Yeah, so that's Cat of Nine Tails. I like it. Patrick doesn't. Most people don't. Argento doesn't even like it. Maybe I might just like it just because, again, I saw the cut version for so many years, and I heard so many bad. It's kind of like Friday the 13th Part 5. Everybody fucking hates it, and so when I finally watched it, I'm like, hey, I kind of like this.
Sure.
I don't know. It might be the same thing where just expectations were so low that the fact that I liked anything about it pushed it over for me. Maybe I'm just a contrarian. I don't know. I still, it wouldn't make like a top 10 or anything like that. Well, maybe. I don't know. I'm not talking about that. So let's move on. Let's move on to one that everybody likes.
Hell yeah.
Every living person. Lucio Fulci's A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, released February 18th. So just the next week. Its Italian title is
Una lucertola con la pelle di donna.
It was a censored version, re-released here in America as Schizoid, and really crappy. They cut out all the cool stuff. But the French title is Les Solpe von et Enfer, which, how do you say that? Les Salope? Les Salope von...
No.
Anyway, it's we're just not going to even bother. It's Sluts Go to Hell, basically, is what the movie was called in France.
Love it.
Which, you know, the American, I have the American poster, and it's like a woman running away from bats. There's technically something that happens in the movie, but it makes it look very different. This is another psychedelic psychodrama, and I think it's much more psychedelic and much more psychodrama. It was the second of Fulci's 4 original Gialli, all of which were actually quite different from each other. First was Perversion Story, which was AKA One on Top of the Other, which is, if you squint, kind of like his sexy version of Diabolique, the French film. There was this one. Then there was Don't Torture a Duckling, which was called Long Night of Exorcism for some reason in the US, and the Italian title translates to Don't Torture Donald Duck. But that is a politically charged anti-Catholic mystery melodrama with some really sleazy elements, but also some just really sad parts to it and something to say. And then he made the Psychic, known as 7 Notes in Black, or Murder to the Tune of 7 Black Notes, which was a contemporary Gothic romance that wasn't even particularly bloody. It was much closer to Edgar Allan Poe kind of story. And then he found mega fame. He made gory Gothic horror movies, which we talked about on Tracks of the Damned, City of the Living Dead.
Check it out.
Check it out. There's a 4K UHD of that coming out, so you can watch along. But he returned to Giallo methods, to a series of movies I don't know if you can count as Giallo. The New York Ripper, which was this really sleazy, gory slasher movie kind of thing. Murder Rock, which was a shockingly unviolent kind of ripoff of Flashdance and Fame, but with a murderer. And Cat in the Brain, which is a self-insert meta-horror movie about a director named Lucio Fulci, whose psychiatrist is trying to convince him that he's responsible for the murders that the psychiatrist himself is actually committing. That actually is an important point. How much Fulci does not trust psychiatrists is something that he doesn't trust Catholics or psychiatrists or politicians, it seems. I don't think Fulci was stealing ideas from Martino here, and I think that In the Folds of the Flesh is the first really psychedelic Giallo I can think of that I've seen, and that one I don't think was particularly popular, and I don't see almost any of their way they did psychedelia. I see almost none of that in this movie. I think this was Fulci doing his own brand of psychedelia, and then sort of framing that in a sort of Bird with the Crystal Plumage concept. The idea that in Bird with the Crystal Plumage, something that a lot of movies liked ripping off, is the idea that the hero sees a murder and he knows he's witnessed it wrong. He knows that he saw something different, but he can't figure out what it is, so he keeps replaying the murder in his mind. So we have lots of slow motion rewinds of the murder whenever he's just sort of spacing out. And this whole movie is based around that idea. So the plot is Carol Hammond is a sexually frustrated wife of a successful London lawyer who is having bizarre, erotic dreams about her uninhibited neighbor, Julia, who presides over noisy sex and drug-filled parties in the house next door. One night, Carol dreams that she has killed Julia and wakes the next morning to find her nightmare has become a reality. Julia has been murdered and Carol is the main suspect. So a lot of this movie is about a woman who can't trust herself and isn't sure about her own memories. So the idea of the Bird with the Crystal Plumage memory is really expanded upon in a way that's super psychedelic, and then gives Fulci an excuse to show lots of nudity and attractive women kissing and fondling each other, and a clever way of bringing sex into the situation. I can't remember. We talked about this one on the Directors Club episode, right?
Yes, we did an episode of Directors Club on Lucio Fulci, and this is one that we talked about at length. Obviously, the timing means that probably Fulci wasn't trying to do Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. At the same time, it is similar enough that I'm not an expert in Italian genre cinema, but I would say, like, I wonder if they were both going off of something. I did, in preparation for Oasis of Fear, watch Umberto Lenzi's Paranoia, aka Orgasmo.
Yeah.
And certainly there is a lot of the vibe here of this like wealthy woman who has this sort of ancillary connection to the sort of swinging younger generation. In this case, it's her neighbors, and it's sort of awakening her sexuality, and it's about her struggling against her sexual repression in some way. And so you have a little bit of class as well. Like a lot of the people that when she's trying to figure out what's going on, it's her talking to all of these like hippies who are sort of living in warehouses, and they're these bohemian artist types in direct contrast with her own lifestyle. But obviously Lucio Fulci does not need anyone else to tell him how to do surrealism.
Yeah.
and I think this is a instructive movie. I am not as hot on this movie as some, and I do think it's because I love like the first 30 minutes or so, and I think Lucio Fulci's all the dream sequences are beautiful. That fur coat with the weird owl eyes on it, like that falling through the void in slow motion, and all those sexy scenes and everything, like all of that stuff is so unbelievably cool. The nightmare where she's like running through that crowded corridor and all the nude people, awesome. As soon as it gets into the plot, I'm just like, oh my God, this is as incomprehensible to me as any Giallo I've ever seen. And a lot of them are quite incomprehensible to me. And this is one I've seen like 4 times. And by the last 30, minutes or so, I'm always just like, I have no idea what's going on. And a lot of the more nightmarish touches have been replaced with straightforward investigation. And it's no wonder that Fulci would take this film and then say, all right, well, let's ditch all the part where you're expected to care about plot. And he would do his best work just sort of doubling down on the surrealism.
Right. And he still had a couple years. I mean, it was the end of the decade when he made Zombie, so he's sort of working through this method. I haven't seen any of his early comedies, but
I'd be surprised if they had these sorts of nightmarish sequences in any movie before Lizard in a Woman's Skin.
His earliest movie I've seen is Massacre Time, which is just a solid action Western. And then he made his first gory movie would be Beatrice Cenci, which is just a costume genre that has this sort of air of out of control when the violence happens, but it's not psychedelic. And the only psychedelic stuff in a Perversion Story is sort of just texture that's happening in the background because they go to dance clubs. So this really is him pushing something that I don't think he had ever pushed to this degree. And it does lead directly. And in the gore too, it has one moment that landed them in trouble where she stumbles into a room and there is like some sort of nonsensical experiment happening on dogs where they're just sort of being bled. They're open and hanging, and there are tubes going out of their organs, and they're just being bled, and they start crying at her because I guess they're still alive, and she just runs out of that room, and it's just sort of a nightmare image. And it got them in trouble because it was convincing enough that people thought they actually killed dogs. So Carlo Rambaldi,
hell yeah, the legend.
The legendary creator of E.T. had to go into court and say, these are just coyote skins that we bought, and this is all fake.
And if you're one of the people who recently saw Possession for the first time, because it's now on streaming, he's also responsible for that thing.
The tentacle sex monster is also one of his. And then what you say, so to me, I think it's an excuse to make no sense because it's being told from the point of view of a narrator who is so unreliable that she's even lying to herself. And I don't want to go into spoilers on a lot of these because they are mystery movies, and I feel like, but the idea here, the way this one ends, I could see it just being seen as a cop-out by a lot of people, especially like the kind of people who get mad at the movie April Fool's Day ending the way it does, because it does make everything you've seen before that kind of inconsequential by the time you get to the end. But I also think it's a pretty ironic statement on the whole thing because the killer gets away with it. So I don't know. I see what you're saying, and I do think it does lose some. I like all the weird hippies that she runs into that are like that are totally witnesses, but they're so anti-authority, that they're just not helpful witnesses to the prosecution or to the cops. I like that bit. That's definitely a Fulci kind of way that like I would say that Carol's character is almost a bit of an insert, because he doesn't, as a person, he didn't understand hippies or bohemians. He thought it was weird. Most of these directors did. They were already in their 50s by then. But he also hates authority. So he would see these as dumb kids doing dumb shit, but also in a way that he kind of liked, because he hates authority and fascists and all that stuff. But yeah, so I like the idea that she is her own antagonist in a way, because she can't trust herself. But I see what you're saying as far as it doesn't make sense. And I did have to watch it more than once to even understand what the ending meant, to tell you the truth. And then this leads into something that Martino would like, where there's sort of a cabal of people working against. I think that I would assume that's kind of stolen from Rosemary's Baby.
We'll see. Yeah, certainly All the Colors of the Dark is Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah. And so there's a cabal idea that is not quite happening here, that you kind of think it might be happening, but then it's not. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk about this one too long, just because we talked about it on Directors Club already, but and also I don't want to ruin the ending entirely. So I want to talk about the actors real quick. Florinda Bolkin is a Brazilian actress. She's the lead, and I think she's really, really, really good. I know that it's hard to judge actors in a lot of these Italian genre movies because they're being dubbed, but she does so much without talking in both this and Don't Torture a Duckling, where she's even better, and in The Fifth Chord, which you're going to talk about in a bit. I think that she's one of the most interesting actors in the whole of the genre, maybe just like the whole of Italian cinema at the time. And then the other lead is Jean Sorel, who is a French actor, who was also in Perversion Story, and he might be the actor all-star of this whole podcast. He's gonna come up a lot, but he was in Sweet Body of Deborah. He was in a movie I've never seen by Salvador Samperi called Kill the Fetid Calf and Roast It, which is a great title. He was in Lindsay's A Quiet Place to Kill. He was in Jose Maria Fouquet's Eye of the Hurricane, which we're going to talk about in a bit. He was in Aldo Lato's Short Night of the Glass Dolls, which we'll talk about at the end here. And he was in a movie I just saw for the first time, Eloy de la Iglesia's Murder in the Blue World from 1973. Just came out from Cauldron Films. Really interesting take. It's a sort of mix of ideas from Clockwork Orange and Giallo. And it's really bizarre, but really cool. Anything else on this one?
Well,
Patrick?
fans of Fulci will, of course, want to note that they're the shot with the hippies laughing at her with their eyes all white. Not a whole lot of Lucio Fulci's patented obsession with eyes in this early film, but that does track with his later stuff.
The white eyes, yeah. You imagine he just had like a box full of them. Just ready at every set and shoving them in people's eyes on his own accord.
He's making all the women he dates wear full eye contacts before they make love. It's just a horrible scene.
Yeah. Well, then we'll move on to one that I don't remember if you liked. Enzo G. Castellari's Cold Eyes of Fear, released in April 6th. Italian title is
Gli occhi freddi della paura.
And this one, I don't really know how to categorize. It's sort of half home invasion, half drawing room mystery. But it's also a political thriller. And it's also kind of a cop movie. I think this all comes down to the fact that Castellari was an action guy, and he was a really good action guy. He might be the best action guy in Italy at the time. He did High Crime with and Street Law, both with Franco Nero, which kind of popularized Poliziotteschi in the years just a little bit after the 73 and 74. And then he also popularized the Italian post-apocalyptic kind of Mad Max and Escape from New York ripoffs. He made some really popular ones of those. You can see a little bit of it in this. There is a sort of random scene where a bunch of bikers get in a rumble and are chased off by the police, which feels like the one very Castellari-esque sequence in the entire film. I'll read the synopsis for this one real quick. Against a backdrop of swinging 60s London, a young playboy type steals a beautiful Italian girl from her elderly date and suggests she come back to his place for some good times. his place, in quotes, being owned by his father, a rich, respected solicitor. Unfortunately, for a couple of criminals have plans of their own, one for money, one for revenge, and the lovers end up prisoners in a tense siege situation. I don't know if I'd call it a siege, but did you like this one?
I hated it. This is my least favorite.
So it's just because this one really depends on plot and is hard to follow.
Mm-hmm. And also, this is the one to me, and obviously, I'm not a Giallo expert the way you are. This is the one to me that I most questioned, is this really Giallo?
Yeah.
It really has, it does open with a scene in a sex club, and that is like a sort of a pantomime Giallo scene with a straight razor, the whole deal. And like that is the only part of the movie that feels to me, as someone who pretty much always thinks of Blood and Black Lace / Deep Red, or Bird of the Crystal Plumage as being, that's what a Giallo is. This one just feels like it's a the Desperate Hours, Petrified Forest kind of hostage story that they've been making forever. But in this case, the characters that on both sides, the victims and the criminals, are both extremely boring.
I never used to like this one, and I always suspected it was because I think Castellari didn't have any interest in it. And yeah, Desperate Hours, and a lot of critics compare it to Wait Until Dark, the Audrey Hepburn movie. I don't see that as much, except for the fact that they're kind of stuck in a room with each other. The scene you're talking about, the sex club, it is not just the only Giallo scene, but it feels like it's making fun of, the whole point of it being a pantomime is sort of making fun of this formula that's still kind of new, which is an interesting approach, and I wonder if was meant not necessarily as much as a gag to like make the audience think they're watching something different, but a sort of meta commentary on Castellari's part about how much he didn't want to make this movie and just wanted to make a thriller instead.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, one of the ways I would measure Castellari's disinterest is that his camera is absolutely insane in this movie, to the point that it is over, like, just wildly distracting, and I can't figure out what's happening because he's constantly doing like crazy zoom ins and framing things strangely and shooting from inside of a fireplace, all that classic just like empty style. And that to me was just like, oh, this is a guy who doesn't care about these characters.
Yeah, it's stuff that works in an action movie if things are moving, but it's really just people standing in essentially two rooms.
Yes.
Like a sort of foyer and a drawing room, and that's pretty much it, other than the street scenes. It's interesting because the street scenes are really lively and kind of nice very early in the film.
I think they're lively because at least some of them are actual like stolen, unpermitted shots in on the streets of England.
Yeah, it's like the English equivalent to New York's 42nd Street.
So they're sort of doing the run and gun kind of vibe there. So that would explain a lot of that energy.
And there's also in the background, Billy Wilder's Secret Life of Sherlock Holmes is playing in one of the theaters. And I know that would be a coincidental stolen shot, but I also feel like somebody, probably Castellari, is like, oh, this is sort of a Sherlock Holmes kind of thing minus Sherlock Holmes. Maybe we should get that in the background, because it does sometimes feel like a Poirot or Holmes movie without Poirot or Holmes, just the people left to figure it out themselves, and when they don't, the bad guys have to explain everything to them. There's a lot of the bad guys saying, you know who I am, and them saying, no, I honestly have no idea who you are. What about this? Does that remind you? Kind of. How about this? Kind of. And then eventually goes, I'm that guy from The Thing. Come on, man. I did like I said, I liked it more this time. There's something weird about the fact that this became kind of part of the Giallo canon, and I think it was because of availability. For whatever reason, it was really readily available at video stores when just before DVD, when I would go renting these things. I saw it at multiple stores. I think it was Redemption, the UK label, released a version of it. And so I think it's just its availability ended up getting it sort of in the door as far as, well, it's the mid 90s, and most of these movies you're reading about in these expensive import books and zines are not available unless you're willing to get them from someone from the back of Gore Zone magazine, and that who knows if they're even going to send you the triple duped VHS from the Japanese Laserdisc or whatever. I think when you have one that people could readily find, it just sort of became part of what people talk about when they talk about the canon.
Makes sense to me.
Castellari's job is easier. It doesn't take a lot from Argento, but Morricone basically just rips off his own Bird of the Crystal Plumage score. It sort of just sounds like outtakes from that and the Cat o' Nine Tails score. I think that he was probably brought on this project late and it's like, I don't know, here's some shit I have that sounds vaguely like Argento. Because, and I mean, as much as Ennio Morricone sort of defined the sound of spaghetti westerns with Fistful of Dollars, he's defined the sound of this era's Gialli with Bird with Crystal Plumage and the other movies he did with Argento. A lot of these artists, these composers were trying to just do a version of that with lots of jazz and lots of drum solo stuff and lots of women vocalists saying la 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 or whispering or something, just sort of making noises. I haven't seen Desperate Hours myself, but I did see Petrified Forest, which is another Humphrey Bogart movie. I think that has some in common with that. But I don't know, would you call it just a sort of film noir then, if it's not a Giallo?
If the definition of Giallo is like hyper stylized Italian thrillers of all colors, like this is a more or less a thriller plot. It's just, it happens to be a particularly unthrilling rendition of one. And it is hyper stylized. So like I can see it. I can see that. But it for me, it's just like, it doesn't have momentum. It takes forever before you figure out what anyone is actually trying to achieve. And therefore there's not really much of a ticking clock. And then once there is, and I have to admit, like, part of it was, this was difficult for me to pay attention to because I found it so boring that I could not keep any of the character relationships straight in my head. And that just, it's like one of those problems that just compounds as the movie goes on. I feel more and more lost and disinterested. And so like, I think I missed some like important plot details. Like by the end of it, I couldn't even quite figure out what was going on with the bomb and where the bomb was and where the judge was and what was like.
There is a very funny suspense sequence where the judge has this big fat fuzzy cat and they've tied a bomb tripwire to his door and they're determined to blow him up by him opening his own door. I don't know why they don't just blow him up.
I think that's why I was confused. Is I don't know why they don't just blow him up.
There's no good reason. The whole thing is that the guy wants him to die. It's not an issue if he has to die publicly, like supervillains always say. But his cat really wants out of the room and almost sets off the thing. And there's a guy trying to unwind the cord, and the cat just keeps going and trying to push its way out. And I do find it very amusing that maybe the most suspenseful moment in the whole movie is just because a cat is being a cat.
I was determined to rewatch the last 30 minutes of this before we recorded, and then it just didn't happen because I was just busy or whatever. But this is easily my least favorite of the ones that we watched for this episode. Possibly my least favorite Giallo ever. I can't think of many I've disliked more.
I don't know. As I was rewatching it, like I said, I enjoyed it more, but I did feel a little weird that we included it. And I was starting to think that one we decided not to watch just because I was running out of time was The Designated Victim, which would have been the next one in order, which is basically a version of Strangers on a Train. And so I kind of wish that we would have done that one instead, but it was too late.
Oh, well.
There are 4 notable actors in this movie: Fernando Rey, Gianno Garco, and I said 4, really just 3. Fernando Rey, Gianno Garco, and Frank Wolf. Rey was a Spanish actor who was a big star in Italy and France. He is the main villain in William Friedkin's The French Connection and its sequel. He appeared in a lot of Buñuel movies, including Tristana, Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, which is a favorite of mine, and The Obscure Object of Desire. Garco was a tough guy actor. He originated the role of Sartana, who is probably the second most popular spaghetti western character behind Django. Like, there's a lot of Sartana movies that actually don't even have a character named Sartana. Unlike Franco Nero, he actually played Sartana in a number of movies, where Nero only played Django twice. And this was the first of 3 Gialli he appeared in, followed by The Psychic by Fulci and Lamberto Bava's 1992 slasher Giallo Body Puzzle. And then Wolf was an American actor who has bit parts in Corman movies like The Wasp Woman. He ended up in Italy like Clint Eastwood after appearing on TV westerns, and he was in Brunello Rondi's The Demon in 1963, which is in that Severin folk horror set, a really interesting, not even really a horror movie, but a really interesting neo-realist kind of fantasy film. And but he made a bunch of westerns, but the reason we all love him is because he's in Sergio Leone's greatest film, which is Once Upon a Time in the West, and he's in Sergio Corbucci's greatest film, which is The Great Silence. And those were both released in 1968. And he made two other Gialli the same year, or no, one other Giallo the same year, Luciano Ercoli's The Death Walks on High Heels, which is another one we probably maybe should have covered instead. He died of suicide December in 1971, less than a month after Death Walks on High Heels was released in theaters. Very sad. But I think that he does a lot to carry the film. And like you said, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but he has a certain... I think he's interesting to watch. I don't think he dubbed himself, though. His voice sounded off to me. Yeah, and then, I mean, Giovanna Ralli is the one woman in the movie. She doesn't have much of a cult following, but I think she's also really pretty good in it. I think that she has to do a lot of heavy lifting as well. Given that that's really a movie about four people, she's the most interesting of the four people, I would say. Anything else just about this one?
I'm afraid not.
Okay, then let's move on to Eye of the Hurricane, which is our one and only Spanish thriller on here. Which was released in Spain as
El Ojo del Huracán,
and Italy as
La volpe dalla coda di velluto.
which translates to The Fox with the Velvet Tail. There's swans all over this movie, including the credits. There's a physically actual swan. There's swans in all the decorations. Really surprised they didn't go with a swan-themed title, given that animals were popular. And Fox has nothing to do with this particular film. And I called this the bad romance psychodrama type, which is it's essentially just the kind of movies Umberto Lenzi was making at the time. The plot synopsis is Ruth and Michelle separate after Ruth finds another man, Paul. Ruth and Paul go to a sunny, idyllic beachside villa to spend the summer. They're having a great time together, and then things start happening. The brakes on her car fail, and Ruth nearly escapes death. The diving equipment goes faulty, and Ruth almost drowns. Then Michelle turns up at their doorstep for an uninvited social call. So there's this might as well be a Carol Baker, Umberto Lenzi joint, because it's the same type of story that you saw in Orgasmo and So Sweet, So Perverse, sort of mixing and matching elements of those two plots. And it's about stories about women who are, again, in a bad situation because they have picked the wrong lover, basically. But this is a case where there is a cabal against her. This is the only Spanish Giallo we're covering again, which I would call an Almario. I guess we still call him Giallo, though. I don't know a lot about Forky beyond his two Giallo-adjacent thrillers after this, The Game of Murder, which was released as Tarot in 1973 in Spain, and It's Nothing, Mama, Just a Game, which was released as Beyond Erotica in the US in 1974. That was basically, it was released by Mondo Macabro pretty recently. It's kind of Most Dangerous Game meets Psycho. Like, it's an interesting movie. It's basically David Hemming playing a slime ball and really eating it up, and it's pretty good. I don't think it's a Giallo. The actress they got even looks a lot like Carol Baker, Anila Gatti, and then I assume Baker made her own Spanish Lenzi knockoff, The Fourth Victim, which came out like a couple months before this one, directed by Eugenio Martin. Did you like this one? This is, I think, the last one you watched, so I don't think I heard if you liked it or not.
I did like this. I mean, certainly it helps that it is such a simple story. It's not difficult to follow, so that's a point in its favor in this genre. But I did like the vibe of it. I did like the just totally fashion forward, like fabulous vacation. The whole
Yeah.
It opens with a couple dramatic scenes where she's leaving her husband, but then after that, it is just like swanky bossa nova jazz and like sexy scuba diving and driving in expensive British sports cars and like it's just like so they have the upside down Spider-Man kiss and
I have a note here. They really, that was on the poster too. There's a scene where Paul is hanging from a tree to surprise her, and they make out for an especially long time, and he eventually removes her top, and that was the poster. So yeah, I mean, they must Raimi must have ripped that off.
I really like I know, because something is going to happen, and then the longer that drags out, the more the anticipation builds. I think the core problem with this movie is it has the plot of a story about a woman who thinks that she might be going crazy, and it never does that. So instead, it comes across as a woman who is maybe a bit of adult, where like clearly someone keeps trying to kill her, and it's like, oh, I guess someone's trying to kill my husband, even though like her husband's the only one around who's like, or not her husband. She thinks maybe her husband's trying to kill her lover, but like it's her lover's the guy who's around and who's able to tamper with the scuba gear and all of that. And at no point does she think like, oh my gosh, I'm just paranoid. Everyone isn't actually plotting against me. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know. I'm tortured by it. Like, it's just sort of, it doesn't kick into that next gear that sort of over the top psychology that you kind of crave from these kinds of movies.
Well, there's this like fifth character who doesn't have much else to do other than very vaguely warn her that the guy she's with is bad, and sort of he leads her to figuring out what's going on. It's sort of a weird character. He's like this beach bum guardian angel character. And I think that, I mean, it's a morality tale about not getting involved with people, and I think that she's very unlikable at the beginning of the movie, just the way she's dismissing her husband and stuff, and that he seems like a nice guy, and I think we're supposed to kind of resent her.
Oh, it's an Italian movie. My sympathy is never with the husband.
No, it's a Spanish movie. It's a Spanish movie.
That was my mistake. I thought I was watching an Italian movie, so I instantly was like, "Oh, this guy's he probably deserves it." I didn't realize it was a kind Spanish man who was getting treated like that.
But I don't know what you call these kinds of movies where someone gets involved with the wrong person, and like realizes that the person they're with is a bad person. Like, I don't know where that comes from. Is it? I was thinking Suspicion. The Hitchcock movie has some of that, but that's not really it. And Spellbound, but that's not really it. Night of the Hunter, maybe, but even in that one, the kids know exactly what's going on.
I think there is like I think I haven't seen Sleeping with the Enemy in forever, but Sleeping with the Enemy is maybe one of those. Maybe
it's like the male equivalent to a Black Widow, I guess, movie.
Right.
And I wrote here that maybe we should call it the Red Flag Giallo. It should be its title, because there just keeps being red flags that she should really notice. Like the guy chasing the swan he's bought her around just to be a jerk. Like any sort of like torturing animals is a pretty big red flag. Or the fact that he and his weird army friend are just throwing a gun around. As soon as they find a gun, they just start shooting it. And then her husband is sort of pushing the guy to shoot at him, and for no reason. Just a lot of red flags that she's just not noticing.
On the other hand, like, did you see that car? Did you see that house? They're going scuba diving. Like, that's pretty tempting. You can ignore a lot of red flags for a fabulous beachside villa.
And it's sort of like the ultimate of these jet set giallo things I was talking about, because like there's a shopping montage. Like, I don't know if I've seen that in another one of these. There's something sort of like it in Torso, but that's really to set up how predatory all the men are in town. This is just a shopping montage.
Though I will say, one of the women at the store where she's buying clothes is like this brief, totally ignored red herring for the rest of the movie, where the camera kind of zooms in on her also looking lasciviously.
Yes.
Which is like, yeah, maybe she just sees a beautiful woman and is like, yeah, I like what I see. But I think for me, a lot of my goodwill for this movie is that the twist that where she figures out what's happening does not come at the end. It comes like with 30 or so minutes before the end. And in my head, I built up a very exciting revenge story. And I was really anticipating just this like absolutely beautiful, pristine, sort of holiday home just being totally splattered with blood or whatever. Because I'm just like, oh man, she's going to get her lover's girlfriend. She's going to get, her husband. They're all going to get it. And I think the anticipation of the revenge scheme was a lot more satisfying than the actual payoff that comes, which is kind of a fizzle.
Yeah, she has a better option much earlier on. But it is sort of cool that she has this sort of moment of despair where she's just going to give in. And she breaks away from the despair by coincidence. Like a phone call breaks her out of it and makes it so she's not killed and she doesn't give up. And I like that idea that something coincidental and an outside force like that can totally change the trajectory of a story like that.
But for me, I think the problem with that despair is that I saw her romance with this guy as being like, she is just so swept up in this. He's so beautiful and he's rich and he has this amazing house, and like just the excitement and the glamour of it all was the appeal, and not necessarily like this deep soul penetrating love that if it was to be discovered to be false, then that is the end of her. And so like for me, I just did not buy that. And I thought that was part of the scheme. I go, oh, she left a fake note because she has some other, like when he finds the note, he's going to do this, but then she's going to, and then the phone rang and I'm like, all right, I guess maybe she planned for someone to call at that. Oh no, I guess all right. And then it was just sort of the last 20 minutes were me going, okay, that's fine too.
Okay. That's pretty complex, I guess. There's a theory I have is that I think that some of the fashion stuff, like for instance, there's a lot of ad placement in these movies. Like the joke is always about that there's J&B vodka in every scene.
Mm-hmm.
J&B whiskey in every scene. I don't drink. I don't know what the fuck they make.
They make a scotch
whiskey.
Yes, baby.
It would be surprising to learn that they had deals with the clothing labels, and I know that in the credits for the Bloodstained Butterfly they have a furniture maker in the credits, so there's a lot of advertising involved. But I also think part of what made these kinds of movies popular was a mix of people wanting to watch the lifestyles of the rich and famous, and people wanting to watch frivolous rich people get murdered and tortured.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, how many awards did White Lotus just win? This is a very universal instinct to like, I want to participate in your wealth, and then I want you to punish you for having it.
Yeah. And so I think there's some of that in this. I know that Italy at the time is going through some major economic issues. I don't know about Spain, but I'm going to guess it was because it was still a dictatorship. And yeah, so there's part of me, I mean, this one pushes it so far. I mean, the swan thing is just weird that he buys a swan and just puts it in the bathtub.
I wrote in my notes, Chekhov's swan. Whatever happens at the end, it's going to be like he needs the key, and then he looks up and sees it's in the swan's mouth, and it flies away, and that spells his doom. Like I knew that somehow that swan was going to come back because it's just all over this movie, wandering around, being a stupid swan.
Yeah, being a dumb creature that isn't do well by itself.
And then in the end, it's sort of like, no, actually what the swan represents is I'm kind of done with men, and now I'm just going to frolic on the beach with my pet swan.
With my swan. She takes the swan for a walk. It's actually really cute.
It is a cute ending. I did like that.
I'm going to go for a walk with my swan. And the swan's like, yeah, cool. Let's do it, man.
Yeah.
And they have the nastiest spoonful of caviar in this movie, and I really think it's on purpose to show look how much caviar they're eating in just one spoonful. Isn't that gross? Look at these fucking assholes rubbing it in our faces. Speaking of Spain being a dictatorship at the time, this is not a particularly violent movie. There's the murders are poison. And it's a sexy movie that goes out of its way to cover nudity. It's like Austin Powers style. Someone walks in a room and there's a vase that's covering up their nipple or something. Like there is some nudity, but it feels like it escapes. it's not an unsexy movie, but I assume this was because they had major censorship still in General Franco's Spain of 1970-71. And I believe the version we watched is the export version, so that's the most nude version available. A lot of these Spanish movies would shoot a clothed version and an unclothed version of sex scenes, and then export the unclothed version. So then the censored versions actually end up being the more rare ones, because as soon as Franco died in 1975, they're like, well, we don't need this shit anymore. Let's have boobs and everything.
I do think that might have been another thing of why I found this movie endearing, was because it isn't sleazy, and that was like kind of surprising. And that maybe helped me identify with the main character a little more, that she didn't feel like this sort of object. She's an artist. She has her own sort of thing going on with her pottery.
She has her own Etsy store.
yeah, pretty much. One weird note I have here is that there is the sequence where her lover and his friend find the pistol and they start shooting tennis balls with it. And the husband tempts the lover by holding out a magazine saying, hey, go ahead. If you can shoot so well, shoot a hole in this magazine. And there's this very long drawn out sequence where the lover has to decide whether he's going to shoot the magazine or shoot the husband and sort of claim it was an accident. And the magazine has like a model's face on the front. And then eventually, after this like long sequence where the camera's zipping back and forth, there's lots of editing and it gets faster and faster, he shoots a neat, clean hole in the forehead of this model in the cover of the magazine. And then the camera looks through the hole at her face. And my first thought when that happened was, that whole sequence right there, that was just like Django. That was just like the spaghetti Western Django with the little fingers covering the guy. Like, I was just like, that feels like some spaghetti Western Django shit. And then I looked it up, and this movie has two cinematographers, and one of them, Giovanni Bergamini, was a camera operator on Django, which is probably, whether or not he operated the camera on those specific sequences in Django, that was probably good experience to be on set later on when he became cinematographer for this.
He was at least apprenticing.
Yeah.
My I like this one. Has a really soulful opening title song, which is called "What's It Again," written by composer Piero Puccioni, and it's sung by Swan Robinson, who I'm pretty sure is not a real person, and they just called her Swan Robinson because there's swans in this movie, and it's sort of like a budget animated Bond movie credit. With swans.
This is like this is right after Live and Let Die, and I think it steals an exact shot from the opening of Live and Let Die, where like it zooms into an eyeball from an animation or whatever. But that's part of the fun of the Spanish Gialli, is that they're not quite the same. They're pulling from other people too. So they're trying to look Italian, but then they're also like saw some other movie that that Spanish audiences like. So there's always little surprises, like weird opening title songs and sequences. Do you have anything else on this one? I should say that Jean Sorel, the French actor, is a lead in this one too. This is the second movie of his we're talking about today. I have nothing else to add.
All right. Well, then let's bring this particular recording to an end, this part 1 of 2. So, as usual, you can reach me at Gabe M, as in Matthew Powers, on Twitter, still a Genre Grinder Twitter. I mean, Twitter still exists technically, so we're on there. We have a Facebook, and we now have Genre Grinder Instagram, which I'm trying to keep updated. But as always, go to the Genre Grinder website, where I am pretty consistently, at least once a week, trying to put up new reviews of upcoming Blu-rays and 4K discs. Where can they find you, Patrick?
I always link to everything I do at Uptown Song Club on Twitter. On Instagram, I am also Uptown Song Club. I have a Mastodon Uptown Song Club at linernotes.club, which I don't know. Mastodon's kind of tricky to follow people if you don't get it, and I don't quite get it. But I am on there. I got 3 podcasts. I have Uptown Song Club, which is a music podcast about songs that's fully edited, so you hear the music as we talk about the music. I have a horror film commentary track podcast called Tracks of the Damned that Gabe has been kind enough to appear on multiple times. We've mentioned some choice cuts, including the City of the Living Dead and Hostel Part 2, both with Gabe on it.
We also did Martin, and Martin's coming to 4K UHD pretty soon.
Oh, gosh. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And then I have a new podcast called 96 Greers, where me and Reg Lynn cover the filmography of beloved character actress Judy Greer.
Everybody's favorite.
And yeah, no, that's the thing. It's America's best friend is how she
America's best friend.
pitches herself, and I think that's
And
apt.
mom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, cool. So we'll be back. Hopefully I'll be better by the time we record the second part. And I won't have COVID anymore, and I'll announce that at the beginning, and everybody will clap. Until next time, just wait. Just hold your horses, because there's going to be another one of these. That's my one this time. Until next time, see ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Now I'm lost without you.